Talk about the new approaches to civil rights. So we're going to look at some of the more later civil rights leaders, like we have in this picture we have Jesse Jackson and Louis Farrakhan. So we're going to look at some of their ideas and kind of compare them a little bit to what we saw early on in the civil rights movement, and then kind of how that's impacting us today. So, African American leaders look to affirmative action to gain good jobs and adequate housing. So, affirmative action was enforced through executive orders and federal policies from the president and the Congress to try to combat inequality. So basically, what it does is it calls for companies and institutions who are doing business with the federal government to actively recruit African American employees. And so the idea was this will help improve their social and economic status, but later on it's going to get expanded to other minority groups and women as well. So critics of affirmative action described it as reverse discrimination. So in 1974, Alan Bakke, who was white, this is him right here, there's Alan Bakke, he applied to medical school at the University of California and he was turned down twice. Now, the reason why he was turned down is not because he didn't qualify, but because slots had been set aside for minorities, and those slots, even though he was more qualified than them, they got to get in because of the color of their skin. And so Bakke said that's racism, and he sued the school. And so he argued that by admitting minority students, who some, like I said, had scored lower than him, the school had actually discriminated against him. And so in 1978, there was the Supreme Court case was University of California Regents v. Bakke. The Supreme Court ruled that the university had violated Bakke's rights, and that was racism. And so the thing is it does say in this ruling that you can't have quotas. You can't have like fixed quotas, like a certain percentage or certain number of minorities that you let in. But it does say that using race as criteria as part of the admission process is okay. Okay, so you can use, like, if it's a tie and you have a black student and a white student and it's a tie between them, then the black student's going to get in, okay, over the white student. So in the early 1970s, push for educational improvements for African American students was going on, and so the inequality was apparent as schools in white neighborhoods had better supplies, facilities, and teachers. And so they started to try to desegregate schools. So to do this, local governments implemented a policy known as busing. And what they would do is they would take children who lived inside like black neighborhoods, and then they would bus them to schools that were in the white neighborhoods because they're, the idea was that there were the better teachers and facilities and everything in those white schools. So this was going to gain a better racial balance. In Boston, 20,000 white students left the public school system for parochial and private schools. And so this was known as white flight. Okay, so this white flight occurred in other cities as well. So, where basically they said, we're going to, if you're going to do that, then we're going to just go to a private school. So Jesse Jackson, he was an activist during the civil rights movement, and he worked to strengthen the economic and political power of African Americans. In 1971, he founded the People United to Save Humanity, or PUSH. Okay, their goal was to register voters, to develop African American businesses, and to increase educational opportunities. And then also in 1971, the Congressional Black Caucus was formed, and basically this caucus, it represented specific concerns of African Americans, and it still exists today. I'm going to show you some pictures here in a second. But another leader who emerged was Louis Farrakhan. So Louis Farrakhan took over as the leader of the Nation of Islam, and he has fought for African American rights. So this right here is the original Congressional Black Caucus. So there was originally 13 members. So this is the original, and then today there's 55 members. Okay, so not a single one of those in the Congressional Black Caucus, not a single one of those is a Republican. They're all Democrats. Throughout the history of the caucus, there has been, I think, 5 Republicans, and all the others have been Democrats. But some of the seniority goes back to some of the higher senior people. They go back to like the early 90s, so they've been in there a long time. So like Maxine Waters, for example, that's her right there. She's been in since like 92, I think, 94 maybe. So Hispanic Americans organized. So in the late 1960s, about 9 million Hispanic Americans lived in the United States. So reasons for coming to America range from economic opportunities in the United States, government oppression in their own countries, and basically to escape poverty and war in their own countries. And so when they got here, they faced the same prejudice as other immigrant groups. In 1966, after employers would not respond to worker demands, Hispanic groups organized a boycott of table grapes. And so they combined eventually to form one group known as the United Farm Workers. And so eventually this boycott will end in 1970. So the grape growers agreed to raise their wages and improve working conditions in exchange for ending this boycott. 1969, Jose Angel Gutierrez organized a new political party in Texas. It was called La Raza Unida, or the United People. And they mobilized the Mexican American voters with calls for job training programs and greater access to financial institutions. But this also promoted an issue promoted by Hispanic students was bilingualism. So bilingualism is the practice of teaching immigrant students their own language while they also learned English. The problem that many people had with bilingualism is not that not knowing 2 languages. It's we don't have an official language in this country, and many people in this country believe that English should be our official language, but it's not. However, to kind of function in this society, you need to know English because everybody here knows English. Well, most everybody here knows English. And then the people who don't really struggle when they're like going to businesses or whatever. It's more of a struggle because of that language gap. So in the late 1960s, early 70s, Native Americans began to organize as a result of grievances. So the grievances were like low income, high unemployment, discrimination, limited education, and then short life expectancy because a lot of the jobs that they were doing was very difficult, and not only that, they're living in poverty. And so in 1961, Native Americans issued the Declaration of Indian Purpose, and they called for policies to create greater economic opportunities on reservations. So as other groups wanted assimilation into mainstream society, the Native Americans didn't. They wanted their own independence, and so they formed militant groups such as the American Indian Movement, or AIM. And in 1969, AIM became a symbol, made a symbolic protest by occupying the abandoned federal prison on Alcatraz Island, which is in San Francisco Bay, and they were there for 19 months. And so they just said that they claimed ownership by right of discovery because that's basically what early on the settlers did, the English settlers did when they came in. 1973, there was a violent protest. AIM members occupied the town of Wounded Knee in South Dakota. So there's a clash there between the occupiers and then the FBI, and in the process, 2 Native Americans were killed. So the Native American movement did win some notable victories, however. So in 1975, there was passage of the Indian Self-Determination and Educational Assistance Act, which increased funds for Native American education. It also enlarged tribal roles in administering federal programs, so it got them a little more involved in federal policies. And there's more Native Americans moved into policy-making decisions as a result of that. But Native Americans won a number of land and water rights in court as well, and so they still have, like, some of their reservations became a little larger, and they were able to take control of a little bit more land to survive on. All right, and that's all I got for you guys today. Don't forget to complete your processor and enjoy the rest of your day.